Hello guys, my name is Temidayo Omoniyi and I'm a data analyst for UrBizEdge. So for this session, I'm going to be showing you how to switch between multiple data sources using your Microsoft Power BI. So we're going to be switching between your Excel workbook, your Azure Data Lake Gen 2, your Microsoft OneDrive, and also your SharePoint folder. So the first thing I need to get data. So I'll say get data. Since I'm using a workbook, I can also say get data from your Excel workbook. The data we'll be using is our sales target data. So I'll look for sales targets. So this is my sales targets over here. I say open, check this. I have to go to my data transformation by transforming data. Okay. Yeah, so this is the first data. So I can just rename this as Excel, first of all. So I have my first data. Remember, we're using 4 different data. So I have my Excel workbook. The next data I'll get is from my Excel online. That's from my OneDrive. So I'll go to my browser. So this is my browser over here. So this is the other file. This one is on my OneDrive. So I can just double click on it. It opens the entire Excel in my Excel online. So this is what they call Excel online. So I can come here, I can say open in desktop app. I want to actually get the URL of this. So I can just open it. So I've opened the app, right? So this is my Excel online. The beautiful thing about Excel online is also for collaboration and the rest. So I need the URL link of this. So I'll just go to my file, go to my info, copy path. I'll paste it in my notebook. Paste this in my notebook, right? So everything from question mark to the web, I'll remove this, right? And I'll just copy all of this here. And I go back to my Power BI, right? So I'm inside my Power Query environment, so I don't want to go back. So I'll just go to get new source from here. So this is on the web, so I'll go to web data. And I paste the URL link here and I click on what's okay. She's asking me that what security level. Since it's an organizational data, I can just pick on organizational accounts. I have to sign in first of all. I'll click on sign in with my company's account. Paste. And I click on what connect. Select this. This is actually Power Query Navigator, and it basically gives me a preview over here. I click on OK. Right. So I can rename this here to OneDrive. I still have 2 more data to get. Next one, I want to get my data from what's my SharePoint folder. So I'll go to my SharePoint. So this is my SharePoint over here. So you can see the data is actually also in my SharePoint folder. It's called what sales targets, right? What I need to do is just copy the URL link. So I'll copy everything from here down to here. I'll copy this. I won't copy the share percentage and everything. I'll just copy all of this from here. I'll go back to my Power BI. I'll go to get new source. From that new source, I'll go to more. From the more, I'll go to what SharePoint folder. I'll connect to SharePoint folder. Paste this here. Click on OK. Okay, so you can see these are the files in my SharePoint folder, right? So let me just transform this. So transformation basically means I'm trying to clean the data. So this is the data I need here, right? Which is at row 15. So I can just remove the top 14 rows. I can say remove top 14 rows. Okay. I can also remove the bottom 2. So I can say remove bottom 2 rows. Right. So this is actually a list. I have to expand it to a table. So I can just click on this expand button over here. Just convert it for me to a table. So I say sales targets over here. Click on OK. So now you can see it has given me different parameters. I've done all the transformation for me. So I can just double click on the query. I name it as SharePoint. So this one is from SharePoint. So the last data I want to get is also what? So I can also drop this column over here, this source name column. I can drop the column over here. Okay. So I have my 1, 2, 3. Let me off the view tab so it to be faster. So that's column quality, column distribution of it. Okay. So I have my Excel, SharePoint, OneDrive. So I have one more data to get, which is from where my Azure, right? So now to get the data from my Azure Data Lake Gen 2, I'll go to my Azure. So I already have my Azure open already. So this is my Azure environment. So what I also need to do now, I need to search for some key features. So the first one I need to get is my endpoint. I'll say endpoint. endpoint. So this is my Azure Data Lake resource right now. So I'll click on my endpoint. I have to get the endpoint code. So where's the endpoint code? See data lake over here. So I'll copy this, right? Let me just paste it on my notepad so it'll be faster for me. Okay, this is for the endpoint. I also need to get the access key. So I'll search for access key also. Access. I see access key over here. So there are two access key you can use. You can use the one, but most time just use the first one. Copy this, right? I'll just leave it at this point here. So what I need to do, I'll go back to my Power BI. So I'll get data again. I'll say get new data. This time around, it should be Azure. Okay, so I'll go to Azure. So I'm going to go to the Data Lake Gen 2. So this is my Azure Data Lake Gen 2. I click on Connect. So the idea now, I'm trying to be switching between my multiple data sources. Asking me for the URL link, right? So that URL link is actually the endpoint. So I come here, I copy the entire endpoint. This is my endpoint, right? I paste it here. I can also add the directory folder also. So if I go back to my Azure, right? I click on my Azure Data Lake storage browser. That's my storage browser. I'll go to my blob container. So for my blob container, I know the data I'm looking for is actually at my row, right? So I go to my row. For my row, I'll look for Africa. So this is the data I'm looking for. I actually uploaded it to my African folder, right? So I just copy this. So it's first at row, then African countries here, right? So I'll go back to my Power BI. I'll say raw / African countries, right? So I have two options for data view. I can either use my file system view. I can also use my CMD folder view. So I'll use my file system view for the first time. Click on OK, right? So the data I'm looking for is this. I can also do transform data again. I can say keep top row. So let's keep the first row. Okay. I can also expand also. So I can rename this one now here to Azure, right? And I don't need this column over here, so I can also delete this column, the first column header here. Okay, awesome. So see the idea we're trying to achieve now. I want to create a kind of data source in such a way that if I can change the data source from either my Excel or my local machine, or I can switch it towards my Excel OneDrive, I can also switch the data towards my SharePoint, I can also switch it towards my Azure Data Lake Gen. So how am I going to go about it? Now, first thing I need to do now is I'll go to my OneDrive, first of all. I'll go to view. Always make sure for your parameter, right? Always make sure allow parameter, right? So I'll click on advanced editor. So I need to get the code. So this code basically stands for my my inputs. The change type is the output. So the let is the input, the in is my output. So what I need to do now for my OneDrive, I'll copy all the entire M code here for the input. Done, right? I'll go to my Excel. That's the first one here, right? I'll click on my advanced editor. I'll go to the last line, which is this one over here, right? So to go to the next line, just put a comma. I say comma, enter, right? And I paste that code inside here. So you might be seeing some errors. The errors is because there's actually, you can see the variable name. The variable name of this one is source. The variable name of this one is source. So you cannot have the same variable name in two places. So I have to change the variable name. So I'll come here. I'll say source _ OneDrive. So I just easily identify it. I'll double click on this, copy this. I'll paste the source also here. Paste it here, right? Also, you can see the target data sheet. I can also rename this to what? OneDrive. Copy all of this. Target sheets, right? Since I'm dealing with the OneDrive on, also the change type. Let me also change this one also to for the header. Also make it OneDrive. OneDrive. Copy this. Paste it here. For the type, consider anywhere it's giving me error, that means the variable is actually available already. So it's telling me that there's an error. I have to change the syntax. I can also say OneDrive, right? So I've done for the OneDrive. I click on done now. So I click on done. So I've done for OneDrive. I will go to what? SharePoint also. I'll go to advanced editor. I'll copy everything here also. Copy. Say done. I'll go back to my Excel. That's the original one. I'll click on my advanced editor again. Right, so I'll go to the last line of code, which is here. comma, enter, paste that code. This one now, since it's SharePoint, I can also rename it to what? SharePoint, right? Copy this. For this source also, I'll paste the source here. This is fine. This is fine. This is fine. This is fine. For the change type, you can see it's giving me an error because it's already existing. I can also change to what? SharePoint. For this type, I also copy it because it's also going to be here also. Paste it here also. So for the column name, I can also rename it to underscore SharePoint, right? And that's cool. So I've done for OneDrive, SharePoint. I can click on done, right? Any issue? No issues. So let me go to Azure, which is the last one. I'll go to Advanced Editor. I can also copy this entire code. So they call the code M code, right? Done. I'll go to my Excel, Advanced Editor again. Come here, comma, paste the last line of codes. So I'll rename this one to what's Azure. From Azure for source, I'll paste the source also here as Azure. File hidden. Is there anything like keep row? So if I check, is there anything like keep row? That's fine. But for this filter hidden files, I think it's already existing. This is it already. So that's why it's showing me as an error. Yes, I can also change this one to what? Azure. Copy this, that file one, paste it there. Function. Let me rename this to what? Azure. Because I have to change the variable name. The variable names must not be existing twice. Function. Paste it Azure. Rename column as Azure. The column one comes to here. Because everything is step by step. It just works more like you are using macros in Excel. You record your steps. Rename this to what? Azure. Remove other column. Remove other column of Azure. So all of them must not be the same. That's why I'm actually using Azure this time around. Azure. So I'm almost done. Paste as Azure. Change type underscore Azure. Copy this type Azure column. I also put Azure here, don't worry. Put Azure so I can easily identify. So Azure, right? So I think no issue. If I click on done, you can see no issues, right? So now we're done with, we've created the steps for OneDrive, the steps for SharePoint, the step for Azure has been copied now inside of my advanced editor inside of my Excel. So next time, I have to create a parameter that can easily help me to switch between data source. If I want to use the Excel on my local machine, or I want to switch between the OneDrive or the SharePoint folder, or also the Azure Data Lake Gen. So how am I going to go about that now? I'll go to my Home tab. I'll click on Manage Parameters. So I'll select what? A new parameter, because I'll create a new parameter that can help me switch between data source, right? So I can rename this one here to what? Data source, right? You can put the description. I can say this is used to switch between data sources, right? So the type, I can leave it as any. The suggested value, I can change it to what? List. So the first one should be Excel. I can say the second one should be OneDrive. The third one should be SharePoint, and the last one should be Azure. So do I want to do? I want to be able to switch between. So it don't be like a drop down list. I can switch between my Excel on my on-premise computer, or my OneDrive, or my SharePoint list, also my Azure. I can make my default value to be Excel. Let's select Excel again. You can see it's showing everything. I can show my current value should also be what? Excel. I click on what? OK. Right? Awesome. So you can see this my parameter which I've already created here now. So if I click on this drop down, you can see I have the 4 different data sources, right? So I'll go back to my original, which is my Excel. So I have to put this my data parameter inside of my advanced editor, right? So how am I going to go about it? So I'll go back to my Excel here. I'll select my advanced editor, right? So for the last step now, I'll put another comma. So I want an output this time around. So I'll say my output this time around now should be what? Should be an if statement. I say if right? If the data source, you can see if the data source is equals to Excel, remember I had four data source, then what should happen? Then it should be give me what? If it is Excel, if I come to the first one, which is Excel, you can see the last part of Excel was what? If I scroll up, the last part of Excel was what? Change type. So I'll copy this change type and I'll comment. So I'll say if the data source is equals to Excel, then it should give me this output, which is change type. I'll say, because I'm doing a nested if, because I have four different criteria, which is Excel, OneDrive, SharePoint, and Azure. So I have to use a nested if. That's if of if of if. So I'm writing if of if of if inside of what? Power Query M code. So I'll say else if again, if the data source this time around is equals to what? OneDrive, right? So then what should happen? Then so where is the OneDrive? OneDrive should be the next, right? So this OneDrive. So what is the output of OneDrive? You can see the output of OneDrive over here. So I'll copy this entire output of OneDrive. I'll come down here and I'll paste it here, right? I'll say another else if again, if the data source again, if the data source this time around is equals to, this time is SharePoint, then what should happen? So for the SharePoint now, if I go to the SharePoint, this for Azure, this for SharePoint, this for the SharePoint output. So the last step of SharePoint output was remove column SharePoint, right? So I'll copy this. Okay, then it should be what? Coming just a couple of minutes. Then it should be this. And the last one, which is the last condition, should be an else statement. Else, it should be what now? For the last step for Azure is what? Remove what? Remove column Azure. Copy this. Come here. And I will do what? Paste it here, right? No issues. So now you remember the let is my input, the in is the output. So I'll copy this output here and I'll replace this change type with the output, paste it here, no issue. Then I click on what? Okay, which is done. Click on done. You have to break everything down for me in steps. So let's see. Pray we don't have any issues. Okay, now she's asking me for privacy now, right? So if you are doing it for the first time, I ask you for privacy. So information requires some privacy. This one has to do with the Azure Data Lake Gen. So let's click on continue. Because this is just for tutorials and training, I can also click on ignore security. I click on what? Save. So this should expand it for me now. Okay, voila. So you can see, right? So all the OneDrive, the Excel on premises, the SharePoint, and also the Azure Data Lake Gen. So all of them are now inside of what? One single file, one single table, which is the Excel table. So now I can just, let's test it now. So let's say I want to switch now. So if I come to my parameter, if I change from Excel to OneDrive, if I come here, you should get it. Okay, so you can see the OneDrive is working. So let me also test again. Let me change from OneDrive to SharePoint. Come here again. Okay, you can see it's working. And let's do the last one and come here to parameter. Let me change it from SharePoint to Azure Data Lake Gen. So everything is working perfectly well. So you can see it's working fine. Okay, so the next thing I need to do now, I need to transform this data. You can see the last step is what? Is my output. So any other step I create is just going to go under the output, right? So I can also do, I can fill down in these two. I can also fill down. So I can select these two columns, right click, I go to fill down, right? You can see that's going to fill down under outputs. I can also do some data transformation. I can also pivot all the products. So now from Virgin Supreme, I can right click and go to what? On pivot column. I can use on pivot only selected columns on pivot columns, right? I can remove these two columns. I don't need these two columns here, right? I can also change this from to products, right? And I can also change what to total as amount sold, right? Awesome. Because now the Excel contains this data source for what? OneDrive, for SharePoint, and also for Azure. So I don't need these three tables. And I can just come to this table, the OneDrive table, the SharePoint table, and also the Azure table. And I can also do what? Delete it because I don't need it anymore. Because all the data source now already inside of my Excel here, right? And lastly, I just do what? Close and what? Apply. Awesome, awesome, awesome. So you can see the data has loaded successfully, right? So let me just close this. Let me just comment out. Okay. So let's now create a simple chart, right? A simple column chart, right? I say the total amount goes to my y-axis, the branch goes to my x-axis. I'll compare branch against total amount sold, right? So it's loading. You can see the data, right? The idea for this is I'm using multiple data sources in case what about a situation where my Azure is down and I cannot access my data. So I can easily switch from Azure towards OneDrive. Or let's say for instance, OneDrive is having issue. I can easily switch from OneDrive towards my SharePoint folder or online. I can also use the data on my local machine. So if I go to transform data, I can also see edit parameter, and I can also change from Azure towards to OneDrive. Okay. You can see it's going to take a little bit of time. Let me say apply, right? And that's how it works. Simple, very, very simple. And let's check. You can see no issues. Let's say it's the card. Put the card over here. I'll say total amount here. And that's all. Hope you guys learned a lot. This video is brought to you by UrBizEdge. Bye and have fun, guys.